Did the world wars, revolutions, and big events of human history evolve naturally, or were they calculated and pre-planned? If they were pre-planned, who planned them, and what are they planning for the future of humanity? The answer to this puzzling question can be found within the boundaries of 3 of the world's most powerful cities. Those 3 cities belong to no nation and pay no taxes. They are Washington's District of Columbia, which is not part of the city of Washington or of the United States, the inner city of London, which is not part of London or England, and Vatican City, which is not part of Rome or Italy. These cities, called city-states, have their own independent flag, their own separate laws, and their own separate identity.
Vatican City is in fact a state, the smallest principality in the world. It lies on the banks of the Tiber, completely surrounded by the city of Rome. Its status as a separate state emerged from the Lateran Agreements of February 1929. It has its own newspaper, postal service, radio and television station, its own flag, and a population of about 1,000.
The Vatican also has its own army of Swiss guards, and it even has its own prison. Gracing the walls of St. Peter's Basilica is the Vatican-approved image of God, an angry, bearded man in the sky, painted by Michelangelo. Sinners who disobey God's list of thou shalt nots risk incurring his wrath and damnation and burning in Satan's eternal hellfire. Cruel and violent images of God's tortured Son, suffering, bleeding, and dying, with thorns gouged through his skull and nails pounded through his feet and hands, are on display throughout the Vatican. These images serve as reminders that God allowed his Son to be tortured and killed to save the souls of human beings who are all born sinners. These explanations and scary images are especially difficult for children to comprehend. The Vatican rules over approximately 2 billion of the world's 6.1 billion people. The colossal wealth of the Vatican includes enormous investments with the Rothschilds in Britain, France, and the USA, and with giant oil and weapons corporations like Shell and General Electric. The Vatican solid gold bullion worth billions is stored with the Rothschild-controlled Bank of England and the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank. The Catholic Church is the biggest financial power, wealth accumulator, and property owner in existence, possessing more material wealth than any bank, corporation, giant trust, or government anywhere on the globe. The Pope, who is the visible ruler of this colossal global wealth, is one of the richest men on earth. While 2/3 of the world earns less than $2 a day, and 1/5 of the world is underfed or starving to death, the Vatican hoards the world's wealth, profits from it on the stock market, and at the same time preaches about giving. How did the Pope and Vatican accumulate all that wealth over the millennium? One method was to put a price tag on sin. Many bishops and popes actively marketed guilt, sin, and fear for profit by selling indulgences. Worshippers were encouraged to prepay for sins they hadn't yet committed and get pardoned ahead of time. Those who didn't pay up risked eternal damnation in Satan's oven. Pope Leo X rebuilt St. Peter's Basilica, selling tickets out of hell and tickets to heaven. During the Dark Ages, the Catholic Church not only hoarded the wealth they collected from the poor, but hoarded knowledge. They kept the masses ignorant and in the dark by denying them a basic education.
More than 60,000 armed Christians were on their way to reclaim Jerusalem from the infidel.
Between 1095 and 1291 AD, the Pope launched 7 bloodbaths called the Christian Crusades, torturing, burning, beheading, and mass murdering hundreds of thousands of Muslims and Jews in the name of God. The Pope's brutal soldiers were called Knights Templar or Knights of the Temple of Solomon and evolved into today's secretive brotherhood called the Freemasons. Between 1450 and 1700 AD, the Catholic Church followed up their holy terror with the Inquisition. Based on rumors of practicing witchcraft, the Catholic Church hunted down, tortured, and burned alive millions of innocent women at the stake.
Is to emerge the one truth.
Father, pray for me.
And may the angels lead thee into paradise.
During World War II, the Vatican was criticized for supporting Hitler and his Nazi regime. To this day, the Vatican is still under investigation for plundering Nazi gold from the Swiss bank accounts of Jewish Holocaust victims. Over the past 5 decades, more than 1,500 priests and bishops have been identified in the sexual assault of tens of thousands of boys and girls in their trusting congregations and orphanages. Why is this filthy rich institution preaching spiritual values of poverty and chastity while cardinals, bishops, and priests cover up their crimes of sexual abuse? Why has the Church fought and resisted the compensation claims of their sexually, emotionally, and spiritually traumatized victims? Like Vatican City, London's inner city is also a privately owned corporation or city-state, located right smack in the heart of Greater London. It became a sovereign state in 1694 when King William III of Orange privatized and turned the Bank of England over to the bankers. By 1812, Nathan Rothschild crashed the English stock market and scammed control of the Bank of England. Today, the city-state of London is the world's financial power center and the wealthiest square mile on the face of the earth. It houses the Rothschild-controlled Bank of England, Lloyd's of London, the London Stock Exchange, all British banks, the branch offices of 385 foreign banks, and 70 U.S. banks. It has its own courts, its own laws, its own flag, and its own police force. It's not part of Greater London or England or the British Commonwealth and pays no taxes. The city-state of London houses Fleet Street's newspaper and publishing monopolies. It is also the headquarters for worldwide English Freemasonry and headquarters for the worldwide money cartel known as the Crown. Contrary to popular belief, the Crown is not the royal family or the British monarch. The Crown is the private corporate city-state of London. It has a council of 12 members who rule the corporation under a mayor called the Lord Mayor. The Lord Mayor and his 12-member council serve as proxies or representatives who sit in for 13 of the world's wealthiest, most powerful banking families. This ring of 13 ruling families includes the Rothschild family, the Warburg family, the Oppenheimer family, and the Schiff family. These families and their descendants run the Crown Corporation of London. The Crown Corporation holds the title to worldwide Crown land in Crown colonies like Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. The British Parliament and the British Prime Minister serve as a public front for the hidden power of these ruling Crown families. Like the city-state of London and the Vatican, a third city-state was officially created in 1982. That city-state is called the District of Columbia and is located on 10 square miles of land in the heart of Washington. The District of Columbia flies its own flag and has its own independent constitution. Although geographically separate, the city-states of London, the Vatican, and the District of Columbia are one interlocking empire called Empire of the City. The flag of Washington's District of Columbia has 3 red stars, one for each city-state in the 3-city empire. This corporate empire of 3 city-states controls the world economically through London's inner city, militarily through the District of Columbia, and spiritually through the Vatican. The Constitution for the District of Columbia operates under a tyrannical Roman law known as Lex Fori, which bears no resemblance to the U.S. Constitution. When Congress passed the Act of 1871, it created a separate corporate government for the District of Columbia. This treasonous act allowed the District of Columbia to operate as a corporation outside the original Constitution of the United States and outside of the best interests of American citizens. A sobering study of the signed treaties and charters between Britain and the United States exposes a shocking truth. The United States has always been, and still is, a British Crown colony. King James I was famous not for just changing the Bible into the King James Version, but for signing the First Charter of Virginia in 1606. That charter granted America's British forefathers a license to settle and colonize America. The charter also guaranteed that future kings and queens of England would have sovereign authority over all the citizens and colonized land in America stolen from the Indians. After America declared its independence from Great Britain, the Treaty of 1783 was signed. That treaty specifically identifies the King of England as the Prince of the United States and contradicts the belief that America won the War of Independence. Although King George III of England gave up most of his claims over his American colonies, he kept his right to continue receiving payment for his business venture of colonizing America. If America had really won the War of Independence, they would never have agreed to pay debts and reparations to the King of England. When Congress passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, the U.S. President was made subservient to the King of England. The 13th Amendment is called the Title of Nobility Amendment and forbids U.S. presidents and their officials from using royal titles like king or prince or baron. For some mysterious reason, the 13th Amendment, which was ratified in 1810, no longer appears on current copies of the Constitution. America's blood-soaked War of Independence against the British bankrupted America and turned its citizens into permanent debt slaves of the king. In the War of 1812, the British torched and burned to the ground the White House and all U.S. government buildings and destroyed ratification records of the U.S. Constitution. 1 century later, a corrupt U.S. Congress committed the biggest theft in world history. They passed Paul Warburg's Federal Reserve Act in 1913, handing over America's gold and silver reserves and total control of America's economy to the Rothschild banksters. Most Americans still believe that the Fed, or Federal Reserve, is the government. It is not. The Fed is a privately owned banking system whose majority Class A shareholders are the Rothschilds, Warburgs, Kuhn and Loeb, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Israel Seif, and the Lehman Brothers. This private banking cartel is the Fed and is never audited and never pays taxes. They print and design America's money, which displays their symbols of an Egyptian pyramid, a Masonic all-seeing eye, and the words "In God We Trust." Who exactly is the God they trust? They also collect American taxpayers' money through the IRS. Then they loan it back again with interest to pay for roads, bridges, and other public works. American presidents are handpicked and financed by these special interest power groups. Like George W. Bush, John Forbes Kerry, whose initials are JFK, is a member of Yale University's Skull and Bones Brotherhood. The Forbes part of John Kerry's name identifies his descendancy from Captain Robert Bennett Forbes, who was a drug runner for the Rothschilds' opium drug trade with China in the 1800s. Most U.S. citizens believe that the United States is a country and that the president is the most powerful man on earth. The United States is not a country. It is a corporation, and the president is president of the corporation of the United States. He and his elected officials work for the corporation, not for the American people. Since the United States is a corporation, who owns the corporation of the United States? Like Canada and Australia, whose leaders are prime ministers of the Queen, and whose land is called Crown Land, The United States is just another crown colony. Crown colonies are controlled by the empire of 3 city-states. At the center of each city-state is a towering, phallic-shaped stone monument called an obelisk that points skyward. In D.C.'s city-state, the obelisk, known as the Washington Monument, was dedicated to Freemason George Washington by the Freemason Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia. The secretive Brotherhood of Freemasons laid the Washington obelisk's cornerstone in 1848 and contributed 22 Masonic memorial stones. 250 Masonic lodges financed the Washington Monument obelisk, including the Knights Templar Masonic Order. At the heart of London city-state is a 187-ton, 69-foot-tall Egyptian obelisk called Cleopatra's Needle. It was transported from Egypt and erected on the banks of the River Thames. In Vatican City, another Egyptian obelisk towers high above St. Peter's Square. What exactly is an obelisk? Obelisks are phallic-shaped monuments honoring the pagan sun god of ancient Egypt called Amun-Ra. The spirit of this pagan god is said to reside within the obelisk. Obelisks symbolize the phallus and fertility. At the base of the obelisk is a sunwheel circle symbolizing the vagina. Together, they depict male and female sexual union. Worshippers of Amun believe Amun is the supreme god and creator of all things, and can transform himself into other gods, like Osiris, the god of the underworld, or Seth, the god of evil and chaos. Since vowels were interchangeable in the biblical Hebrew language, Amun can be spelled A-M-E-N, A-M-O-N, O-M-O-N, or A-M-U-N. Today, Amun is one of the most popularly used words in the entire world. It is used in all languages by Christians, Muslims, Hindus, and Jews at the end of prayer. Without realizing it, people all over the world are praising Amun. The Old Testament of the Bible is the holy book of both Christians and Jews. Amun is repeated over and over again throughout the Bible and is hidden within the word testament. The word Amun literally means the hidden one. Many are fooled into believing that Amun means so be it or truly, but in Kings 1 verse 36 of the Old Testament, Amun is identified as the Lord God of my Lord. Why in the world would the Vatican, a fortress of Puritan Christian values, erect a monument symbolizing the pagan god Amun and sexual intercourse right in its own front yard? Like the pharaohs of ancient Egypt who built their empire with the help of a grand vizier, Queen Elizabeth II also has a grand vizier who serves as her most trusted advisor. His name is Lord Evelyn Rothschild, and he is the second wealthiest and most powerful person on earth. He is also Lord of the world's financial capital, the city-state of London. Lord Rothschild and his ring of power hide their identities behind 13 city council members who stand in as their representatives. On November 30th, 2000, Lord Rothschild, now in his 70s, got married in London to a wealthy Zionist businesswoman named Lynn Forrester. The couple then jetted to Washington and spent their wedding night in the White House. Just months before 9/11, they moved to New York and settled into their 18th floor luxury palace at River House, where 2 private terraces offered them front row seats for the scheduled 911 show. Just how rich and powerful is Lord Evelyn Rothschild? Historically, the Rothschild family wealth was hidden in underground vaults. The Rothschilds' secret financial records were never audited and never accounted for. Their family commissioned biographies give the illusion that their family fortune has dwindled, but researchers estimate their wealth at close to $500 trillion, more than half the wealth of the entire world. Besides their many castles, palace mansions, wineries, racehorses, and exotic resorts, the Rothschilds bought Reuters in the 1800s. Reuters then bought the Associated Press, which selects and delivers the same news stories to the entire world, day after day. They have controlling interest in 3 major television networks and easily avoid media attention since they own it. Until recently, they owned and operated England's Royal Mint and continue to be the gold agent for the Bank of England, which they also direct. They control the LBMA, London Bullion Market Association, where 30 to 42 million ounces of gold worth over $11 billion are traded daily. The Rothschilds earn millions weekly just on transaction fees alone. They also fix the world price of gold on a daily basis and profit from its ups and downs. Over the centuries, the Rothschilds have amassed trillions of dollars worth of gold bullion in their subterranean vaults and have cornered the world's gold supply. They own controlling interest in the world's largest oil company, Royal Dutch Shell. They operate phony charities and offshore banking services where the wealth of the black nobility in the Vatican is hidden in secret accounts at Rothschild Swiss banks, trusts, and holding companies. Although Evelyn Rothschild looks like a harmless gray-haired old man, make no mistake about it, Rothschild and his ancestors have handpicked presidents, crashed stock markets, bankrupted nations, orchestrated wars, and sponsored the mass murder and impoverishment of millions. The wealth hoarded by this one family alone could feed, clothe, and shelter every human being on earth. How did Evelyn Rothschild become the filthy rich Grand Vizier to Queen Elizabeth II and godfather of the black nobility? By birth, Evelyn Rothschild is the great-great-great-grandson of Mayer Rothschild and is passing the godfathership down to David de Rothschild. Their story begins in 18th century Frankfurt, Germany, on a cobblestone street called Frankfurt on the Main. Mayer Amschel Bauer was a goldsmith and a loan shark. He hung a red hexagram shield over his doorway and changed his name from Bauer to Rothschild, which means red shield in German. The red hexagram shield was the symbol for the world revolutionary movement. Family biographers describe Mayer Rothschild as a poor man who lived with his family above his goldsmith shop and sold rare coins to royal customers. Contrary to appearances, Mayer stashed a big supply of gold, precious coins, and jewels in special hiding places inside his house. One special hiding place was beneath the back courtyard, where he accessed his strongbox through an underground passageway. Mayer taught his 5 sons the tricks of the trade. To them, he wasn't just their father, he was their lord and master. To them, he was Lord Mayer. In 1773, Mayer Rothschild invited 12 wealthy, revolutionary-minded men to his goldsmith shop. Together, they formulated a plan to seize control of the world's wealth. They made a pact to secretly pool their money and influence to bankrupt the nations of the world and create a new world order. Using his connections, Mayer teamed up with Prince William, who was the ruler of Germany's Hesse-Kassel district. William had a reputation as a cold-blooded loan shark who trained and rented out his Hessian soldiers as mercenary troops. It was a profitable profitable blood-for-money business that made Prince William one of Europe's richest men. Working as Prince William's agent, Mayor Rothschild collected fees for each dead Hessian soldier killed on the battlefield. He hired his sons to help him collect the blood money from renter nations. Since wars were good for the rent-a-troop business, Prince William used his royal connections in Denmark and England to provoke these wars. King George III of England rented Hessian soldiers from Mayor Rothschild and Prince William to fight the American colonists. American colonists had already shot down millions of North American Indians whose spears and arrows were helpless against the deadly gunfire. The worst Holocaust in human history occurred not in Nazi Germany, but on American soil. By 1776, British and Hessian troops arrived on American shores, ready to fight the American colonists.
They're preparing for an attack.
And we won't have long to wait either. See there? Hessian troops to the north.
Hessian mercenaries. I can't believe the king is paying Germans to come here and kill British colonists.
The colonists won their independence, and Mayor Rothschild won his blood money for the heads of each and every Hessian soldier killed on the battlefield. Back in Europe, Napoleon, with his mighty French army, became master of Europe. When Napoleon and his troops stormed into Frankfurt, Germany, William feared for his life and his vast fortune. He left $3 million in the hands of Mayor Rothschild to pay the Hessian soldiers. Then he escaped to Denmark to stay with his royal relatives, all of whom were descendants of the tribe of Dan. Mayor Rothschild received a stock market tip from his World Revolutionary Network. Instead of paying the Hessian soldiers with the $3 million that was left to him by William, he bet the money on his insider stock market tip. With his new fortune, Mayor Rothschild set up 5 family banks to be run by each of his 5 sons in London, Paris, Naples, Frankfurt, and Vienna. On September 19, 1812, Mayor Rothschild died at the age of 68. He left instructions that the amount of the inheritance must never be made public, that secrecy and ruthlessness must be used in all business practices, and that family members must intermarry with their own blood relatives to keep the family fortune all in the family. All 5 brothers dedicated themselves to their ancestors' world revolutionary dream. That dream was to control the entire world under one world ruler by disarming the nations of the world.
A king, the son of David, will purify Jerusalem from the nations that trample her down, destroy the lawless nations, and gather a holy people whom he will lead in righteousness.
Mayor Rothschild's most successful sons were Nathan, who ran the London Bank, and James, who ran the Paris Bank. Together, they changed the face of history and became known throughout Europe as the Demon Brothers. Their father had given them a detailed New World Order plan for world control. Adam Weishaupt wrote and completed the plan on May 1st, 1776, with Rothschild financing. It was a futuristic plan that would put New World Order members over the next centuries into political power positions.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly.
It was a plan to divide and conquer the nations of the world by provoking wars, then profiting from war loans and from the sale of weapons to both sides. Exhausted by war, terror, and chaos, humanity would eventually bow down to one world ruler and one world army as a solution. It was a plan to control public opinion by purchasing the controlling shares in TV networks, newspapers, publishing houses, and film studios.
Briefings and updates from Washington and around the world every 15 minutes throughout the business day. As influential leaders, global markets, and your money take center stage on CNBC.
Completely on the stage, but he was on the scaffold.
Sports, games, and alcohol would be used to distract the masses. Laws would be changed, banks would be monopolized, and people and nations would be made into obedient debt slaves. With Rothschild financing, Adam Weishaupt formed a secret world revolutionary group called the Illuminati. He recruited thousands of influential members by convincing them that only men of superior ability had the right to rule over the ignorant masses. French police exposed the plan when they found documents on an Illuminati courier who was struck by lightning while traveling from Germany to France. The Illuminati was forced underground. They took refuge in the lodges of a secret brotherhood called the Freemasons, who practiced death and rebirth rituals and whose history dates back to the construction of Solomon's Temple. Nathan and James Rothschild came up with a scheme that would put the Illuminati plan for world control into action. It would also make them filthy rich. The brothers helped finance both sides of Napoleon's famous Battle of Waterloo between the French and the English. With advanced knowledge of the British victory, Nathan Rothschild spread lies that the British had been defeated, which caused a stock market crash. While panicked English investors sold their life savings, Nathan bought up their market shares for pennies on the dollar. When official news of the British victory over Napoleon was announced, the English stock market skyrocketed, and so did Nathan's wealth. In one foul swoop, the Demon Brothers had double-crossed the English masses and taken control of the Bank of England. Flaunting their stupendous wealth, the brothers went on a lavish spending spree. They bought mansions, fashionable clothes, and hosted extravagant parties. By 1818, they had picked the pockets of French investors by crashing the French government bond market. According to plan, the brothers formed the world's first international bank and named it N.M. Rothschild and Sons. The Pope became their most famous customer. The Catholic Church, which had financed the wholesale slaughter, torture, and looting of hundreds of thousands of Muslims during the Christian Crusades, were now doing business with the Demon Brothers. By 1823, the Rothschilds were guardians of the entire papal treasure and took over the financial operations of the Catholic Church. Enraged citizens accused the Rothschilds of conspiring to control the world's money markets. Fearing for their lives, the Rothschilds retreated into the shadows and cast their eyes on the youthful United States of America. To avoid publicity, the Rothschilds made themselves invisible by creating and hiding behind two front companies, J.P. Morgan and Kuhn and